Priest, undoubtedly one of the biggest rock and metal bands of all time, sounded in the 80s more like this. And then all of a sudden they start to sound like this. Modern, more aggressive, faster and heavier. Why? Because of one scale that metal people start to discover in the late 80s. Phrygian. And in today's video I want to show you what Phrygian actually is, but not only the scale itself, but also how we can expand this and how we can create some really cool licks and arpeggios with this cool scale. So when you already know what Phrygian is, don't turn off the video. The first half of this video is for the beginners who do not really know what Phrygian is, and the second half is for the more educated musicians, the nerds. So get ready, we're going into the shreddown. We will find out some really cool arpeggios and usage of the Phrygian scale that you probably haven't seen before. Alright, here we go. Hey Guitar Champion, what's going on? I'm 𝗚𝙗𝙦𝙦, back from my practice dojo, and welcome to today's video. So let's find out what Phrygian actually is. Phrygian is a scale that here in the Western European classical music education, music theory is called a mode. Fun fact, the German translation of mode is Scale of the Church, die Kirchentonleiter. But first, let me try to explain briefly what mode actually is. Well, let's take one of the two main keys that we have, major or minor, and let's take in this case A minor. Now we can create scales that not necessarily have different notes in it, or like sharps or flats, but we can create scales just starting on each individual letter of this particular A minor scale. So we have a scale where the B's are a root note, but the rest of the note stays the same, where the C's are a root note, the D, the E, the F, the G, and the A again. These are the modes. And now Phrygian is the mode that starts on the fifth letter of the minor scale, in this case A, B, C, D, E. So we have E Phrygian coming from the A minor scale. Now I know the modes and their concept can be quite confusing, and there are a lot of questions open for the modes. I had a lot of trouble with the modes in the beginning when I started to play guitar. Really a lot. But this is why I recommend to check out, for example, the ZEN of SPEEDPICKING Academy, my Patreon community, because there I upload in a regular basis a series called the ZEN of Series, where I try to explain scales, modes, intervals from the start to the end. Check the link in the description box and become part of this really cool community called the ZEN of SPEEDPICKING Academy. And so on the note E, starting with the same notes as A minor, we have the mode called E Phrygian. But this is not necessarily Phrygian. Just because you have a specific finger shape and that finger shape contains the notes of A minor and the lowest note of that shape is in E, it does not necessarily mean that this E is also defined as the root note, because what is defining the root note is what happens in the background of the music, and the chord progression, what the bass is playing, what the rhythm guitar is playing. This is defining the root note, not what kind of finger shape we're playing. So that's one of the biggest misconceptions and the biggest confusional kind of things when it comes to mode, that people identify a certain finger shape with a mode. When you do this, stop doing this. This finger shape could be any mode. Okay, alright, but I like to have a different approach to see modes. I rather see modes divided in either it's a major or a minor mode. And in this case, Phrygian is basically a minor scale. Like let's take, for example, E minor. E minor looks like this. And the only thing that has to change is the F sharp going to the F. So Phrygian is basically a minor scale, just with a flat second or flat nine in it, depending on how you want to name it. But that's really important. Why? Because that one note that is changing here defines the whole sound, the whole energy, the whole vibe, the whole stereotype behind that vibe of that one specific scale. And that's the cool thing about modes. The modes are basically just major or minor scale with one note difference. There's one exception called Locrian, it has 2 notes different, but all the other 6 modes that we have are major or minor scales, but some with a sharp 11, some with a flat 7, some with a raised 6, and this one note that is changing is creating a whole universe of sound. And in this case, for this metal sound, Phrygian with the flat second. And the flat second creates this kind of heavy feeling, this kind of sound that we sometimes get when we hear riffs like Painkiller, when we hear riffs like Hangar 18 or so many more metal legendary riffs. Because hey, with that scale you can play fast riffs. You can play slow riffs. You can play power chord riffs. You can play open chord riffs. You can add so many different layers and parameters to that scale, but still has that unique kind of sound that the flat second creates. And as we've heard, a lot of metal bands from the 80s, they started to use this kind of scale a lot more than bands from the 70s or the 60s. So that was a really new kind of sound, a new kind of vibe. Of course, the origins of that scale, you can trace them down a really long time ago. I mean, I mentioned in my History of Shred video about Uli John Booth that he in the 70s already played the scale with the 𝙬of 𝗘𝗏. Of course, there are a lot of examples that proves that Phrygian is a really old kind of vibe and scale. I mean, you can trace that basically back to the old Greek where the modes, then the names of the modes are coming from. But there are specific genres who are heavily depending on the Phrygian scale outside of metal. Like for example, flamenco. And flamenco has a really individual approach to Phrygian. And herefore I would love to recommend something that I provide for you to download in the download link that you can get in the description box, where you can also find the links for the arpeggios that will come later in the video, because there I also provide for you guys a PDF which comes from my good friend Florian Magnus Meyer, aka Morian. Morian is one of the main composers, vocalist and guitar player of the band Alkaloid, the technical death metal band where I'm also involved, and he is a classical composer. He created really great pieces like this symphony for orchestra, electric guitar and acoustic guitar. Highly recommend to check out Schattenspiel here on YouTube. It's definitely worth it. It's a really great piece of music. And he is also a flamenco player. Before he starts getting into classical music and composing, he was studying flamenco guitar. So he probably knew the Phrygian scale already from his metal background, but he gained so much more awareness and knowledge about the usage of the scale from his flamenco studies. And he once wrote everything down in a really cool PDF that I've attached to you guys as a free download. So thank you, Florian, for providing that for us. Really cool thing. It's a really nice piece of education. I highly recommend to check it out. Again, the link you can find in the description box. Alright, and then of course you can expand the Phrygian mode with some more sounds, because we have also modes coming from the A harmonic minor scale. The harmonic minor scale is basically a minor scale with a major 7, so that we have a light tone, a leading tone, a tone that leads back to the root note, and of course this new scale, the harmonic minor scale, creates their own modes. And Phrygian will become Phrygian dominant. The G sharp, what used to be the major 7 of A, is now becoming the major 3rd of E. The Phrygian dominant scale, through that major 3rd, or that 1.5 tone step between the 2nd and the major 3rd, has a really interesting vibe and a really interesting kind of tension to it. This is why I even call this the most metal scale ever, because so many bands are relying on that sound and that tension that this 1.5 tone step creates. And of course this is the scale that often has been used in film music and music scores and series, whatever, in pop culture as the stereotypical scale and sound for everything that has to do with the Middle East. But we can do so many more cool things out of this scale, the Phrygian dominant scale. especially when you go into the realm of the triads and the arpeggios. So let's go from E through E and let's find out what kind of triads we have on each individual note. On E, we have first a major triad on E, root, major third, fifths. Then on the F, for example, it starts to get interesting because here we can have a major triad, but we also, theoretically speaking, can have a minor triad. Or we can even combine both and we have a major sharp 9 sound. G sharp is our first diminished chord, A is a minor chord, B is the second diminished chord. So that's interesting that we have two triads that are diminished triad in one scale. C is an augmented chord, another really cool symmetrical chord, only containing out of major thirds, C, major third to E, major third to G sharp, and D is a regular minor triad. So there we already see we have a lot of triads to play around with that are different from our usual scale. But we can expand this even more when we're just going into the 7 chords. Here's now where things are getting really interesting. On the E, the root note, we have a dominant 7. On F, we have major 7 or major minor 7. That's really interesting. Or when we again want to combine both, we have major 7, sharp 9. G sharp is now full diminished. That means another minor third is adding to the already 3 minor thirds, G sharp, B, D, and now as well the F. And then we have also a minor major 7, B minor 7 flat 5, C augmented. You cannot put a 7 chord to the augmented because when you're going one major third higher than the G sharp, you will again end on the C. Theoretically, we can add the B, so we have a major 7 sharp 5 chord here, and the D is a regular minor 7. And these 7th chords are the key for expanding the Phrygian dominant scale, because when we are playing over a backing track, we can play the usual Phrygian dominant scale that we all maybe already have learned so far, the 3-note per string scale, which can become quite boring a little bit. It's not really modern, it's a little bit old school, but we can also work around with some of those arpeggios like I did in the intro video. So let me go through the arpeggios again really quickly. First, the E dominant 7, one cool way to play it is like this. Where we hammer, sweep from the D to the G string, hammer again, and then sweep from the B to the E string. And the same descending with up sweeps and pull-offs. So now we can take this kind of pattern and throw away the pick. No, but we can take this kind of pattern, we can play it over all the 7th chord that we have in the Phrygian dominant scale. Like for example, F major 7 or F minor major 7. G sharp full diminished. A minor major 7, B half diminished, so minor 7 flat 5, C augmented, D minor 7, and then we are back at the E dominant 7. And of course you can use those kind of arpeggios as well to superimpose over the E Phrygian dominant sound. For example, 𝙗𝙤𝙦𝗚𝗏 is doing a lot in his necrophagia state. This F major 7 arpeggio over E Phrygian dominant riffing. So something that I really like to do is to use the minor 7 flat 5 as a really cool substitute for the E Phrygian dominant kind of sound. I made a whole video about that on the ZEN of SWEEPING, my Patreon Academy. Again, link is in the description box. But there are so many cool ways how you can create new sounds by using these kind of arpeggios over a riff like. Instead of playing for the 1000 times, licks like this, I don't know. yeah, you can spice that up a lot with those arpeggios. Don't, of course, forget to download the tabs for those arpeggios. You can find them in the link in the description box. Alright, and this is one of my favorite ways to spice up the Phrygian dominant scale. I highly want to encourage to play around, to experiment with those sounds, with those shapes, and trying to find something out for your own and for yourself. Maybe a new cool arpeggio, maybe a new cool sound, or new cool approach. I love to play around with these kind of things and can highly recommend for everybody to try that out as well. So much for today's little video. I hope you like this video. If you like this video, it would be lovely for you to subscribe to my channel, to leave a like, leave a comment, and I hope I'm going to see you in my next video. I wish you a lot of fun learning, practicing, and mastering the guitar. The Phrygian dominant scale will definitely help you by that. Cheers and power your progress.